club takes pleasure in attracting a stellar list of speakers that address today's most relevant issues. The club's place as a refuge for rich discussion and networking has never wavered after 123 seasons.
We are dedicated to encouraging debate on the issues that matter to this city, this province, and this country.
The Canadian Club is one of the most important podiums anywhere in the world that a Canadian can speak to, tell Canadians what it is that they think, develop those thoughts. And so I want to thank you for that very, very much.
Please join me in thanking our esteemed panelists today.
Through our programs and events, including our youth and young leaders programs, our diversity partnerships, our joint events, and our media and social media opportunities, we offer you access to dynamic political, social, and business figures from abroad and right here at home.
The platform from which the eloquence of Canada has flowed all of that time, whether it be business, education, politics, sports, arts, and culture. If someone wants to say something to Canadians about this country and about the future of this country, this is the venue you choose.
Hello, and thank you for joining us. My name is Andrea Mandel-Campbell, and I am a director of Canadian Club Toronto. Today, we are connected virtually, but it is important to recognize the land on which the club sits and where many of us live and work. We acknowledge that we are on the territory of many Indigenous peoples over the centuries, most recently the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. We at the Canadian Club Toronto recognize that at face level, land acknowledgements are not enough. We cannot change our past, but we must confront it, accept the truth, and do better in our present and in our future. Last week, Kamloops Tiswakam First Nations shared that as many as 215 children's bodies were found near the site of a residential school in Kamloops, British Columbia. Canadian Club Toronto acknowledges the sadness and anger that we are feeling upon learning of this tragedy, and especially the trauma that has been stirred for those whose lives have been personally impacted by the residential school system. We recognize through the work of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and others that there is much more we need to learn about our shared past and to make right the injustices. The Canadian Club Toronto, as Canada's longest standing podium of record, will discuss more of this shared past and future in our coming sessions. At this time, however, we would like to take a 10-second pause to honor all lives lost and those whose lives have been forever changed by Canada's residential school system. Thank you. Before we turn to our panel of exceptional Indigenous leaders, here's some information about how to participate with us. The click here to switch stream button helps if you find that your internet is slow. The video quality may decrease, but the audio quality should remain strong. Once you click the questions tab, you can enter your questions in the window and they will be sent to the moderator. The request help button located in the bottom right corner of the page is for technical support. I want to thank today's sponsors, which include National Public Relations, Inkameep Cellars, and Imperial. Inkameep Cellars, the first Indigenous-owned winery in North America, has generously donated 2 cases of their premium tier Quemquant wines for today's virtual door prize. 2 lucky winners will be announced during today's closing remarks. Now, to introduce today's panelists. We are joined today by Tabatha Bowles. She is President and CEO of the Canadian Council for Aboriginal Business. Clint Davis is CEO of Nunasi Corporation, and Matt Jamieson is CEO of 6 Nations of the Grand River Development Corporation. Today's conversation will be moderated by our own Karen Restoule. She is co-founder of Bold Realities and a director of the Canadian Club Toronto. Karen, I will now turn the Canadian Club podium over to you.
Thank you, Andrea. So Canada was reminded this past week that our journey to reconciliation continues. And I want to share this quote with everyone here today from Justice Murray Sinclair from his interview yesterday with Matt Galloway on The Current. He shared that reconciliation is about establishing a relationship of mutual respect. But before we can get there, we have to do everything that we can to ensure that the Indigenous people of this country, especially those who have gone through this kind of oppression directly as the survivors have an opportunity to heal and to find themselves and to feel validated that they did nothing wrong. A very powerful reminder from a very insightful leader. I encourage you all to listen to the full interview. And while we, as Indigenous peoples, continue the work to heal and rebuild our communities, we know that the path to reconciliation in Canada is not one that we can walk alone. The truth about our history must be shared with Canadians, and our path forward is one that we must continue to build together. Today's discussion is one of resilience, perseverance, persistence, partnership, and growth. And we are honored to be joined here today by three exceptional Indigenous business leaders who have spent their careers paving the path to economic reconciliation. Welcome, Tabatha, Clint, Matt. So we know that Canada is a large landmass that spans from coast to coast to coast. And while most Canadians are aware of the economic activities happening between the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans, not many of us know what is happening on the Arctic coast. Clint, you've spent your life growing with the people and lands of the Arctic. Take us through what's happening in the North.
Nakumik, Karen, and it's a real pleasure to be here and share some of my thoughts, particularly with the work that's being done at Nunisi and some of the work that is clearly being done across the North. I'm Inuk, which means I'm Inuit, originally from Labrador, which is Nunatsiavut. It was the last Inuit land claim to be settled in Canada. For many of you who may not be aware, the Inuit, we make up about 65,000 of us across the country, and we span 4 major regions, stretching from the northern part of the Northwest Territories, all across Nunavut, into northern Quebec, and then into my own beloved homeland of being Nunatsiavut and Labrador. The very unique thing about Inuit is the fact that we've settled all of our land claims. They all started in the early 1970s, and the last Inuit land claim was settled in 2005 with my own Indigenous community. There is, but the territories, the North itself, are also made up of Métis and First Nations people. And the thing that makes things very unique and different about the North is that when you take into account Inuit Nunaat, the homeland, as well as the other territories, the majority of residents in the North are Indigenous. And there's a variety of different governance models that exist, which really provides remarkable authority and decision-making powers in the hands of those local communities. Our communities have been involved with economic activity for many years. In fact, Nunisi was created in 1976 as in anticipation of the resolution of land claims to ensure that there was a platform for Inuit to be able to participate in any business or economic activity and that Inuit would not be left behind. And Nunisi have been able to grow over these years. And from what we're seeing now, and what I'm seeing on a daily basis is profound change. There is just a remarkable focus now. Unfortunately, the focus seems to be happening more on an international level with the opportunity that exists within the North. I think we've heard time and time again that the Arctic is the world's barometer and that climate change is impacting the North in a much more profound way than what we've seen with other regions of the world. We're looking at different developments that could be taking place with the opening up of the Northwest Passage and new transportation routes. You're also seeing a greater attention on the part of security, sovereignty, with Canada looking at ensuring that it is trying to protect the North. But we do lack a significant amount of investment. Both the Inuit Tapera Kanatami as well as the Nunavut Tugnavikan Corp have put out reports highlighting the massive infrastructure gap that exists within that region, and what this means in terms of being an impediment to business activity. There is activity that's happening now. An incredible number of people who are being employed were involved in mining, in the case of the Yukon, forestry, shipping, fishing, etc. But really, there is this need for Canada to put a focus on what I see as a beautiful part of this country and a remarkable frontier, which is a great opportunity to engage and ensure that local people benefit from development.
That's great. Thanks for that overview, Clint. And we'll come back around with some follow-up questions on some of the points that you've mentioned in your opening. But for now, we'll turn it over to Matt. Matt, you've been working with Six Nations for years on the economic development front, much like Clint and Tabatha have, and so many others across the country. Most recently, your community's tireless work came to light with the announcement of a big project, the Oneida Energy Storage Project. And I understand that that's garnered quite a bit of attention and curiosity. Turning it over to you to tell us a little bit more about yourself and the initiatives that you've been working on.
Great, thanks, Karen. And it's wonderful to be here with the group. Some talented folks, absolutely, who I know well. And so Six Nations of the Grand River is, of course, in southwestern Ontario, and we are the largest by population Indigenous community in Canada. And we're very fortunate given our geographic location. So our challenges are a little bit different than what Clint faces up in the north, but nonetheless, our responsibilities are the same. And, I'm fortunate enough to be in the role that I am, which is to build strategy and advance the economic initiatives of our community through the development corporation that we created in 2015. Essentially, like many other Indigenous communities in North America, frankly, Six Nations struggled with economic development for a number of years. There's always been this aspirations to participate, but we just couldn't seem to get it right, and there was always challenges, and whether that was political interference or just a lack of focus and lack of discipline. In 2015, we did launch our development corporation with a specific focus to separate business and politics. And using that sort of platform has enabled us to advance our economic interests quite quickly. And over the scope of the last 6 years, we built an asset value greater than $100 million. And of course, asset value equals revenue, equals profits, equals community impact. And so through that time, we've been able to build a reputation to get the job done, and build a reputation to develop partnerships that are meaningful and align with our values and our vision as a community. And, our mission as a development corporation is to achieve economic self-sufficiency, but the keywords are without compromise. We're not prepared to compromise on our values. And so we've spent a lot of time in the energy space, the renewable energy space as an example. And we've invested well over $65 million of our own money in projects to operationalize renewable energy projects in our region. And what's emerged over the last number of years with the renewable energy space is somewhat of a bad rap, because the way that the energy grid works in Ontario is that, when energy is created, it's either consumed or it's lost. And no one can control the sun nor the winds. And as a result, when wind farms and solar farms produce power, that power is sometimes lost. And given the nature of the industry, the developers, of which Six Nations is one, we get compensated for that energy whether or not it's used or not. And so ultimately what happens is renewable energy tends to get this bad reputation or a bad rap from the ratepayer who thinks that there isn't a lot of value. When in actual fact, there is. The greenhouse gas reduction and the impact on the environment are non-negotiable. As Clint says, the environment is absolute paramount in terms of our focus on how we do things and the importance the environment has on society generally. So the Oneida Energy Storage Project was really a concept, an idea that was born in the partnership between Six Nations and a company called Enerstore. And what it does, it's a grid-facing solution that allows technology, battery storage, lithium battery storage, to harness energy when it's produced, to store it, and then ultimately pump it back into the grid when the grid requirements are there. And what that does is it unlocks a number of inefficiencies in the market, It makes use, the highest and best use of the renewable energy that's created. But it also, because of it, it unlocks efficiency. It mitigates and reduces the need, if you will, to build new energy plants in the region or in the province by making better use of the things that we already have. And so for us, again, that goes back to a sustainability exercise to examine what do we have, what are the tools that we have, and what steps can we take to maximize their utility so that we don't have to go and disrupt the environment and cut down on further trees or disturb the Mother Earth. And so the Oneida Energy Storage Project really is an exciting proposition. It's a game changer in terms of innovation in Ontario, and it has taken some time to advance the mandate through the channels of government and the regulatory structures in Ontario to adopt new technology, because in many cases, industry seems to do things the way that it's always been done, because frankly, that's the way it's always been done. And so changing the narrative and embracing innovation is really one of the key pillars that we as a development corporation have adopted. And we think that the Oneida Energy Project will ultimately be a game changer and will lead to better efficiency in the energy space and further adoption of renewable energy in the market space. Because we are an investor in the renewable energy market, we are a counterparty to power purchase agreements. So we do have a vested interest in making sure that the grid is efficient in 15, 18 years from now when those contracts come up for renewal, because we do want to see further expansion of renewables, because it aligns with our values and our vision as a company. So I'm happy to talk about that further, Karen, as we get into the dialogue, but there's a quick overview of where we're at. Thanks.
Absolutely. Always a great story. And I'm already getting questions flowing in, so you're definitely piquing the interest of our audience here. Tabatha, moving over to you. These initiatives, these significant projects, they signal to Canadians that there is indeed a rise in Indigenous business and entrepreneurship through Canada. I know that CCAB has done some tremendous work here to support Indigenous businesses and entrepreneurs. What can you tell us about the work of the CCAB? What kind of initiatives are underway to help support them? And also a little bit more about yourself. Sorry about that.
Okay. Miigwech, Karen, thank you. It's a real pleasure to be here, and thank you for the land acknowledgement and for the moment. It has definitely been a heavy week, I think, for many of us. So pleased to continue this discussion today. So I am very pleased to be here. Karen and I, someday we'll have to meet up when we're both home in our communities of Dokis and Nipissing, because we're not that far apart. So I actually came from the energy sector, and that's how I had the pleasure of meeting Matt, working in that sector for 15 years before joining the CCAB. And I always say when I speak on panels with Clint that it's such a homecoming, because Clint used to be in my role at Canadian Council for Aboriginal Business. So very honored to be able to lead the team at CCAB. I moved into the role as president and CEO on the same day that we announced COVID pandemic. So I've not yet moved into my new office, no, worked in the office since taking on this role. And I think that's really important, because the work of CCAB has always been to grow the Indigenous economy, and doing that by connecting corporate Canada and non-Indigenous businesses with Indigenous businesses and Indigenous entrepreneurs, and understanding how best we can create that bridge between the two to support Indigenous economy. And we've seen incredible growth, close to 60,000 Indigenous businesses across Canada in every sector and every size, every province and territory. We're seeing Indigenous businesses being created at 9 times the rate of non-Indigenous business. We also see incredible growth in export and export potential, significant interest of Indigenous businesses to export across the world. So really working to support them. Our work definitely over the last year has shifted a little bit in just ensuring that we can sustain those businesses, and ensuring that the government programs that were rolled out, that Indigenous businesses and active corporations were eligible to access those programs. And initially there were a number of programs that we were ineligible for due to the Indian Act, due to the way that we were structured. And we had a lot of work to do to ensure that those programs were remedied. And that's kind of a newer area of CCAB, that advocacy role that we didn't do as much before. But it's become so apparent to me how important associations like CCAB and business chambers are during this time to support business. So we are a membership-based organization. And I think a point of optimism is our membership has been growing exponentially. So we are currently at 1,330 members, which when I joined in 2018, I think at the beginning of 2018, we were 700. So we've almost doubled our membership in a couple of years, which is incredible. And we're seeing new membership in areas where we hadn't seen before. So where, of course, you know, corporate members were in resource extraction or all of the major banks. So businesses that were working directly with Indigenous business and communities, or maybe had to work with Indigenous communities. And now we're seeing organizations join that really want to understand how they can do better, how they can support Indigenous community, Indigenous people, and Indigenous business. And those are companies like Amazon and Google and Facebook and Uber. So we're seeing this real rise in corporations who just want to understand how they can be part of supporting the Indigenous economy, which is a real point of optimism. And I think there's lots of weeks where it gets like you feel like you're saying the same thing over and over again, but having those new corporations come to us and want to see how they can do better is a huge point of optimism for us. The other programs that we're really focusing on is our research. So we firmly believe, and this is partially probably the engineer in me, but without informed research, we're not going to be able to close the gaps. If we don't know what the barriers are and the gaps are, how can we inform policy and develop programs to ensure that we're helping Indigenous businesses overcome those, or helping policymakers develop programs that really fit the needs? So our research is about a third of our group of our staff, and that research has been recognized by OECD. And we do that research not just for government, but also for corporations who are really looking to understand where are the opportunities for them to work with Indigenous business. And more recently, we're doing a lot more research focused on a gender lens, because that research doesn't exist, I think, across many sectors, looking specifically on how what the impacts are on women. And definitely through COVID, we've seen that those impacts have been different. The other thing I'll just raise quickly is one of our biggest priorities is procurement and ensuring procurement from Indigenous business. And we have what is called a procurement marketplace, where we have about 85 procurement champions. So these are corporations who have committed to purchasing a certain percentage or committed to move forward in purchasing from Indigenous business. And within that tool, we also have over 800 certified Indigenous businesses. So it's kind of an opportunity both for the Indigenous entrepreneurs and Indigenous businesses to have a direct person in a large corporation that's committed to purchasing from Indigenous business, which is so important because it's so hard for an entrepreneur or any business really to find that right person through a large corporation in procurement. But it's also an opportunity for a bit of a networking. Businesses can go in and search specifically for Indigenous businesses in a region, in a certain sector, and either connect with them on the tool or pull that out and put that into their own procurement tool within their own corporation. We definitely see that procurement from Indigenous business is one of the biggest areas that we can both ensure that Indigenous businesses are able to ride through and the economic recovery, but also continue to grow. So that is one of our big priorities as well.
That's great. Thanks for the overview. CCAB seems to be very busy, and I'm confident with the rising number of entrepreneurs that the organization is just going to grow from here. So thanks for that. I want to shift us to a place where there's been a lot of interest in terms of the how. I get a lot of questions in my network, friends calling saying, I heard about this great initiative out, in Six Nations or in the North, people taking note of the fantastic partnerships that are taking place, and telling me that there really isn't a lot of information as to how the communities, the organizations, and corporate Canada were able to work together to land those initiatives. So I'm throwing this one out to you. I don't know who wants to go first. Matt, I know there's tons of interest on the Oneida project and a great story there with tons of partners that have come together to make it happen. So maybe we'll start this one off with you.
Sure, great, Karen. Just to maybe underpin a little bit about the Development Corporation at Six Nations. We created this institution to pursue these economic opportunities, but we did it for really one primary reason, and that is we needed to get organized. We needed to get organized and prepared to do business when business opportunities presented themselves, and that was to create a vehicle that would enable us to enter into relationships and counterparty relationships with government as well as the private sector. And I mentioned earlier, we've done really well, and we've been very fortunate, and we are geographically positioned to be much more fortunate than we are already. I have visitors who come to our community from across the country, and there's always a different lens, and that lens is really reflective of the different barometers of preparedness of where these communities are. Some come to our Six Nations and say, wow, look at all the things that you have. You have banks, you have your own healthcare facilities, educational facilities, and we're very fortunate to have all of those things. But then we have other Indigenous community leaders who come here and say, what are you guys doing? You are not taking advantage of the opportunities that are at your doorstep. And so it's really a responsibility that we've embraced as a development corporation to get prepared to do business, to pursue opportunities, and when those opportunities are there. And so when it comes to partnerships and how we do things, I think that we've learned a lot over the course of the last number of years. The energy sector, as an example, is a place where we've played heavily, largely in the renewable space, because it's one of those rare sectors that aligns with our values. It's not like we are participating in the construction of a nuclear plant or some other type of activity that may not align with our values as a community. So the renewable energy space really sort of created a platform for us to participate in a meaningful way. And then through that level of participation and sophistication that we've built as a company, we built a reputation. And through that reputation for execution, the opportunities continue to flow to us, partly because of our geographic location, but also because of the reputation that we've established in the marketplace. And so for us, when we look towards partnerships, we don't have any shortage of companies who want to work with us. In fact, we have to deploy a filter to screen out companies who need us more than we need them. And we're in a good position in that regard. So we do have somewhat of an acid test when it comes to companies who we want to do business with. We're not interested in being showcased on a shiny annual report to say that where there's this tokenism partnership with an Indigenous community. We're partners with companies who put action behind their words and their meaning. So a company like Aecon, as an example, we created a joint venture with Aecon, a company called A6N. And A6N is an entity that's located in our community that employs our people. And it allows us to vertically participate in the projects that we invest in. And so we've invested in over 900 megawatts of renewable energy projects. Now we're investing in the Oneida Energy Storage Project, which is about a $500 million project. And the great thing about integrating the strategy that we've built with the partnerships that we have is that our community members will be the ones who build this battery storage facility. So it's no longer a passive investment scheme that we're pursuing. It's real participation. And you know what? It takes time and focus and commitment and strategy to be able to execute and build those relationships. But what we found is as we put together these relationships and position ourselves with good partners, there's this exponential growth that has happened for us, and we think it's really the way forward for us strategically. And that's why partnerships and joint ventures are really our number one key pillar of our strategy as a development corporation. So from the Oneida Energy Storage Project, we are a 50-50 owner, developer, lead developer. We have a seat at the table. We write equivalent checks to the development cost to advance this project. And through the success we've had with our partner Restoule, we've been able to bring the Canada Infrastructure Bank to the table, who have recently announced a commitment of up to $170 million of financing for the project. That really is a key ingredient to help make this project advance. Because again, as I mentioned earlier, it is an innovative technology that hasn't been developed at this scale in Ontario. And so now you have this unique situation where you have an Indigenous-led partnership with a private company who have the operational know-how and the development expertise. You have the federal government who stepped up through the CIB, and now you have the province of Ontario who will be the regulator, and you have a company like Hydro One who will be the transmitter. You have all of these components that come together, and they come together because we've been able to demonstrate the value creation through good partnerships and through a reputation of execution. So it's that kind of thinking, I think, that will ultimately lead to the evolution of, Indigenous economic development version 2.0. And that is not to be part of somebody's annual report, but to actually have our own annual report and scorecard of those companies out there and how equipped they are to do business with us.
It's fantastic leadership, and thank you for providing the details to those relationships. I know this is something that many of our viewers were quite keen to hear about. And I'm going to turn it over to Clint. I know there are similar stories and partnerships to talk about in the North. So I'm just going to toss it over to you and have you share with us those insights.
Sure. So to be quite honest, I mean, there's very little I can add from what Matt had said, because I think he just, what's interesting is he's speaking from, as I would be, from certainly a community perspective and the development corporation he represents. But his approach, is just so valuable for all of those communities across the country, whether they be First Nations, Inuit, or Métis, in terms of looking at how do you engage and participate in partnerships, joint ventures, or investing in solely owned businesses where you're overseeing the operations of those companies. A couple of things I would suggest, and particularly for individuals, companies that are looking at trying to do work with Indigenous communities. I can't emphasize this enough. Research, research, research. Take the time to see where the value that you're bringing as a company will either support, complement, or add value to the Indigenous entity for which you're looking at, right? If you're not taking the time to look at who the Indigenous Development Corporation would be, what are their strategies, what is their focus, how are they governed? And I'm saying this in the sense that it's amazing what you can find out online. It's not going to be perfect. There's going to be tons of gaps, but just start with that so that at the very least, you come in with a little bit of an informed kind of approach, as opposed to coming in with, this shotgun approach and hoping something's going to stick. There's nothing that gets under my skin than just getting a company talk to me about, they would like to sell us X, or they think that we should partner because of Y. And they haven't taken the time to look at our website, to see where we're focused, to see what our goals are, what our aspirations are, and how we're actually structured. The second thing, and this is a bit of advice for people, free advice, I suppose. If you're going out and you want to do business, and it's not just applicable to First Nations, but as well as Inuit, Métis. Look, you can go to have a discussion with either an elected official, like the president of an Inuit association, or a chief, or the president of a Métis association. Let me ask you this: like, if you want to go do business in Thunder Bay, do you reach out to the mayor? Probably not, right? So, like, I don't know why you're going to. Like, what I would do is, rather than going to the elected official, normally, if you look at every single community would have an economic development officer. And more communities are looking at development corporations as that vehicle for which to participate in economic activity. Approach those individuals. Chances are they're non-elected, and they're the ones that are focusing on business, and they'll be the ones that will provide you a much more focused response on how do you actually come in and forge those relationships. Matt said it as well, which I think is absolutely critical. This takes time. Like, if no relationship in business, be it Indigenous or not, doesn't take time. And so I've been, and I'm sure, Matt has seen this. I know Tabatha has seen this. Companies coming in and saying a couple of things. First of all, we're told to talk to you. Yeah, don't do that. Like, that's horrible. If you are forced to speak with us, then we don't want to speak with you. When I was the chair of Nunatsiavut Group of Companies, we actually had a company that approached us and said, the government of Newfoundland and Labrador told us we have to talk to you. All right, so that means we really don't want to do business with you. The second thing is don't try to put pressure of time on the community. Like, you're not their priority, right? You're not the development corporation's priority unless you take the time to be able to, first of all, forge that personal relationship, and then secondly, be able to demonstrate, again, what value you're offering, how that is going to add value to the overall support of your partner, which is the development corporation. The third thing I would say as well is when you do, and again, it just supports exactly what Matt was saying. We don't have to be a reference in a glossy annual report. We, over time, Tabatha and Matt are perfect examples of this, because I work closely with Matt's dad, Ron Jamieson, and he was this trailblazer and working in the area of Indigenous business for many years, when he was the sole voice of trying to bring attention to what the opportunity of that market was in the mid-90s. And so because of work like Ron and other remarkable Indigenous leaders, you know, Taga Curley from the north and from Nunavut and others, we've been able to follow in their footsteps, and we've been able to develop capacity. We've gone to school, we've had job experiences. We are lawyers and engineers and so on. When we get into a partnership, yes, we look to our partner at times, depending upon what it is, that they can bring in those resources and that expertise in certain industries. But don't think we're going to be passengers. We actually add value. We have the ability to review documents. We have the ability to make comments. We have the ability to set strategic direction. We're not just passengers. We're not sitting around just waiting for a dividend check. We're the ones that are actively out there trying to develop our corporation in a way, as Matt said, and which is what we live with Nunavut, is to develop this in a way that ultimately benefits our shareholders, which are the communities of Nunavut. So those are a few of the things that I think are absolutely critical. The last thing I want to mention is, I think, a really interesting trend that you're starting to see right now, and maybe we can talk about it a little bit later, is actually the relationships that are starting to forge among the development corporations. You're starting to see some different development corporations which are looking at ways to partner. This has been happening certainly in Nunavut with the development corporations in the north. And about 2 years ago, the development corporations for Inuit, of which there are 6 of them, Nunavut is a 7th, came together to form and establish the Inuit Development Corporation Association. And we did it because we recognized that we're all doing our own thing and developing our own businesses. And we saw that there's ways that we can actually work together and collaborate and to see if we can sell our wares among each other. So it's only been a few years, and it has been, I think there has been progress without a doubt. But what's happened with Inuit in the north, that isn't an isolated incident. You're seeing First Nations and some Métis doing that as well too. So I'll leave it at that, Karen. Thank you.
Well, I hope our audience was taking notes, because you were definitely doling out some key that otherwise might cost a pretty penny. Well, we'll be sure to send your address around for folks to send a check to you for that that advice. Tabatha, CCAB has a program that helps people to understand what those relationships would look like. Do you want to tell the audience a bit more about your PAR certification?
Sure, thank you. And I just, want to also amplify and echo what Matt and Clint have said. And part of that is about building that relationship and an understanding as a corporation. And in my work in the electricity sector, but then here too, I think it's so important to build that relationship in advance of any project. So if you look at the work that Restoule and Six Nations have done together to build what will this Oneida storage project look like together, it's so different that Restoule are saying, oh, we have this large storage project, and then going to Six Nations and says, like, get on board. What needs to happen is these relationships need to be built before you even have a project. So you're not going to the community saying, this is what we want to do, and you should join us. I think it's very clear when Matt said that businesses need Indigenous communities, and any business who's going to build any infrastructure across this country is going to need to have a relationship with Indigenous communities and businesses if it's going to go forward. So the PAR program stands for Progressive Aboriginal Relations. It's been actually in its 21st year now. And it's about the organization, looking across your organization. So not just at partnerships, but at employment, at business development, what might be procurement, it may be equity partnerships, it might be mentoring for businesses, community relations. So really looking at how are you working with Indigenous people and what are your community relation pillars and what are your goals amongst community relations. And then leadership actions. So that is really looking at how am I leading as an organization, as a corporation? And some of those examples might be, how am I supporting students through scholarships? Or how am I ensuring that the people who supply to me also are purchasing from Indigenous businesses or also are going through the PAR program? So PAR is a certified trademarked certification now. The process is really to support a corporation and to guide them through setting their own intentions in each of those different pillars, and then setting goals and then measuring against them. And we have now about 147, I think, corporations who are either certified or are going through the PAR process. And as we said before, those are any sector, so not just energy sector, but the Hamilton Ticats, Uber has just joined on to go through the process. So these are all organizations who are really wanting to understand what they can do. And the thing about PAR that it is intention based is that a company like the Ticats or Uber are going to have different areas where they will interact and how they can work with Indigenous business. The other thing about the process and the program is that we do have independent verifiers that go into your organization, interview your executives, interview your Indigenous employees, interview the communities you work with, and then they make a recommendation as to your certification level of bronze, silver, or gold at the end. The other point, and I speak to this from my past experience, is it's very important in the PAR program that there is a working group that's representative from across your organization. So it doesn't just live within your First Nation, Métis, Inuit relations team. It doesn't just live within your EDI or your HR. There needs to be representation across your organization, from your comms to your HR to your Indigenous relations and executive level leadership, so that everything your organization is doing is with the mindset of how does this work and how are we respectful of Indigenous relations and Indigenous people. And you know, I speak to a lot of people who are in that Indigenous relations role, who maybe are 5 people in an organization of 700, and they can't possibly review every communication that goes out. They can't possibly ensure that HR practices and interview practices do not have bias within them. So it really needs to be something that's rolled out and committed to from across your organization. And that's where we see significant success. But we also see, you know, some of the companies that Matt mentioned have gone through that PAR process. And we do see, and we're starting to see more interest from communities actually looking for that, looking for and putting in their RFPs. If you are PAR certified, then there's a little bit elevated level that you have some understanding or you're working towards something. And now we're also seeing, which is exciting news for us, is shareholders asking their boards and organizations to also develop an Indigenous inclusion strategy. So a few weeks ago, TMX shareholders voted 98% in favor of TMX developing an Indigenous inclusion strategy and a procurement strategy as well to procure from Indigenous business. So you're seeing investors want to understand that the companies they're investing in are also good partners with Indigenous communities and businesses, not unlike wanting to ensure you're investing in an environmentally safe or sustainable company. That conversation is becoming very important to investors and consumers alike. So I think there are, of course, some organizations who kind of, as Clint said, go to a community because they were told they had to, but there's a lot of organizations who are wanting to understand how they can be better. And those organizations are going to be rewarded, not just from Indigenous communities, but from Canadian consumers and investors across the country.
Lots of developments there on the relationship front. I'm going to turn to a question that has actually come in from a few folks in our audience, and it's with respect to the relationship with government. And I just want to draw it in. There's a bit of a theme developing in our conversation. I've heard you've I've heard you say that that business and politics should be separate. I don't know if we're looping in government into the politics bag here, or what. I think Matt mentioned it first, and then Clint also mentioned it. Government, I think from these questions, there's folks from government in the crowd, they might be feeling a little left out. What messaging do we have to our friends in the audience who are working to help government partner better with communities? Who wants to take that one?
I'll start, Karen. Just to qualify my statement about, business and politics doesn't mix. And that's really from the perspective, in my view, from in the community. I think that to Clint's point earlier, these companies would typically come to approach the chief or want to do a presentation to the chief and council. And if you've ever worked in an economic development role in an Indigenous community, you'll know that the latest and greatest and most important economic development opportunity was the one that was presented at council last night. And because, frankly, chief and council, they have a term, they have term limits. They want to be able to make a maximum impact, and they don't want to lose any potential opportunity. And so they spin the economic development folks through the cycle of companies who want to do a business or who need something, frankly, in many cases. And ultimately, the economic development folks can't get traction on anything because they're continually being spun on the latest and greatest thing. And so by separating business and politics within the community, it enables the politics to run its course. They can set strategy, they can set the directives in terms of what the overall focus of the community is. But then they can pass on the economic opportunities to the development corporation, who have the strategic principles in place. They have the management practices, they have the due diligence processes already buttoned down, so that they can evaluate business opportunities based on their merits, not based on their the political aspirations of the council. I'll turn over to Clint.
Anything to add there? Yeah, go ahead.
So Matt is bang on 100%. I mean, this was actually captured by the Harvard Project on American Indian Economic Development. They did a number of years of research to solidify that position, and it's been proven time and time again that normally that you'd want to have that separation between business and politics, certainly on the community side. For government and for our friends who are in government, obviously there's a number of programs that are out there, from different departments in government for investments in business, investments in the evolution or development of new industries, et cetera. I think all that's great. The work that Tabatha is doing right now around procurement is so critical. It is so important. And I'm not a young man anymore. And I remember it was in the late 90s, they were having discussions around it. And it's just time to get on with it. Other provinces have done it. The government of Ontario has done it. I think even Newfoundland and Labrador have done it. The territories are doing it. The feds have just got to do it. If you want to have, and so one of the ways you want to support Indigenous business is to be a customer. Be a customer. And the biggest purchaser of goods and services in this country is the federal government. Activity that's happened in Northern Alberta over years have demonstrated what a profound impact that procurement can have on local businesses. The other thing, if you want an international example, just look to Alaska. I mean, the largest companies by revenue that exist in Alaska right now are tribal corporations. And don't forget, I think it was in the late 70s, early 80s, they almost went bankrupt. They have been able to strategically position themselves to ensure that they are going to be a company of choice and a preferred supplier to the federal government. They have, what they're doing is they buy companies, they turn them into Alaskan Native companies, regardless of the state they exist in, and then they qualify for federal procurement in that state. Most of the larger companies that exist, the tribal corporations, they are in 50 states, and in some instances, they're in other countries as well. I think that, the Matt, the Clints, the Sean Willies and others who are the CEOs of DevCorps and are entrepreneurs as well, without a doubt, but the DevCorp, like the Harry Flaherty's and so on, we want to position ourselves to make sure, and we want to have growth in our companies. We want to be able to hire more people. We want to be able to invest in our people as well and have a positive impact on our local economies. be a customer. Make sure, let's get this done. It doesn't have to take a couple more years. There are no reviews or studies that have to happen. Just get it done.
Great advice there. Tabatha, over to you. I can see you just
I'm like
there. Yeah,
dying to get into this conversation. I think from a government perspective, there's a few things. So procurement, of course. So we did a study with support of federal government that looked across where federal government spent their money in 1 year and all of the Indigenous businesses in Canada and matched them through the NAICS codes. And it showed that Indigenous businesses could supply 24% of the spend of the federal government in 1 year. And to date, they are averaging around 1%. So there's a mandate letter that was set out in 2019 to work towards a minimum 5% spend. We're continuing to work with the government on those programs and policies, but at this point, there's numerous businesses out there that can meet that 5% today. The other piece is, and this is something we've been saying widely, is there are programs out there to support Indigenous business, but they're all very centralized into Indigenous Services Canada or Ministry of Indigenous Relations. And when we look at other entrepreneurship strategies, they're government-wide. So the Women Entrepreneurship Strategy is government-wide. The Black Entrepreneurship Strategy is government-wide. But as Indigenous businesses, if you ask any other ministry that's not Indigenous Services Canada, it's often funneled into Indigenous Services Canada because it's an Indigenous business. That's for Indigenous Services Canada to deal with. And what we're really pushing for, and we've had great response for this to date, I will say, in meeting with a number of ministries, is that every ministry needs to ensure that their programs that support business support Indigenous business, and that Indigenous businesses are aware of them, that they're able to access them, that there's a carve out for Indigenous businesses within those programs, that it doesn't all funnel into one ministry. And procurement definitely is a way to do that, but there's lots of other innovation dollars and funding that can also support Indigenous business across government, and we want it. So I would say from a government perspective, that is definitely a big ask, that we really need not specific separate boutique programs, but really look at the programs you're developing and ensure that there is an opportunity for Indigenous business to participate in them.
This is absolutely a great conversation. I think we can all agree that we could go on for at least another hour and cover so many other areas. We're almost at time, and I want to give the panelists an opportunity to share an area of insight that we haven't yet covered. We've received so many questions, but one of them is, can you highlight your favorite Indigenous business success story? I am looking for new businesses to support. Thank you for hosting this panel today. So maybe as we do our last round, if we want to highlight some of the Indigenous businesses or offer some insights to those who are looking to invest, I think that is something that at least one person in the crowd is looking to hear from us on here today. Who wants to take a first? We'll go with Clint.
If somebody's looking to invest in Indigenous businesses, I think that's fantastic. I think that's excellent. I think there's a couple of things I'll share. So first of all, when we talk about challenges, and I'm sure Matt can jump in on this too, but when we talk about challenges around access to capital, and for Matt and I, we represent development corporations that have strongly established balance sheets. We have a strong track record around credit, et cetera. And our shareholders actually have capital as well too. So there's that level of availability. But Karen, you made reference to this earlier, where you are seeing more and more Indigenous communities being involved in medium to large size projects, which would put a strain on any entity, that it would be a small to medium sized development corporation to try and attract that level of capital. We all have banks and financial institutions chasing after us, and rightly so, because we do have the ability to service our debt. But at the same time, it's that equity piece that we don't have. And so I think if someone was looking at that, seeing that as an opportunity, I think that's huge. I think it's something that has to be taken into account. It did happen. It did happen in Ontario through the Green Energy Act, where you actually had the government of Ontario provide a guarantee on equity loans to Indigenous, both Métis and First Nations communities that wanted to participate in renewable energy. So the program wasn't perfect, but it gave access to that level of capital, which wasn't taken into consideration, or it's never really happened in other parts of the country. The last thing I would say for those potential investors as well, yeah, there's risk for sure. Take the time to assess if it's real or perceived risk, right? And so just, check your perceptions about what you think Indigenous business will be, and take the time to see if these are real risks or perceived risks. I can tell you now that I served as a head of Indigenous banking, both at the Bank of Montreal and TD. Sure, some of our clients were challenged, but when you compare the loan losses in those two financial institutions of mainstream commercial clients and those with Indigenous groups had a loan loss of less than 1%. We are concerned about the level of debt and capital that we take on, and we service our debt. So we actually have a good track record around servicing credit. So I think we're a strong investment opportunity, and I welcome anyone to pursue it for sure.
All right, Matt.
Sure, I can't say much more than Clint. He did a great job. I will say, the access to equity financing is always a challenge, especially in business models like a battery project, for example, where you may not have a track record of success or be able to demonstrate a financial model that's quote unquote bankable. And so, in those situations, we look to our partners, especially, large corporate partners who want us to participate in an opportunity to provide, creative equity financing, equity bridge deals where we can get into an equity spot and then ultimately take them out once we establish a track record of cash flows and the business model proves out. So being creative and in the approach to Indigenous communities from a partnership perspective means being prepared to provide equity financing, which is effectively underwriting your business model. I mean, the Indigenous communities will have a steep learning curve as it is to get up to speed on and develop the expertise around the business model, on its surface, and not to mention go out and securing equity financing. So I think that would be a key piece for any large corporations out there looking to do deals with Indigenous communities, to look at that sort of a mechanism. I do want to circle back real quick to something that Tabatha said around, Indigenous communities are necessary to be part of the equation. And I will relate a quick story. I was in South Korea and I met with the CEO of Samsung, because we're partnered with Samsung on a $900 million energy project, and we were having dinner. And he said to me, Matt, you know what we realized? We can't build anything in Canada without partnerships with Indigenous communities. And this is going back to 2011. And so, I mean, they were here and they invested several $billions into the province. And it was refreshing to hear this person on the other side of the world say flat out that they recognize that Indigenous partnerships are necessary. And I'm really happy to hear that, through the activities of the TMX group and other actions in publicly traded companies are starting to recognize the importance of Indigenous partnerships. And we look forward to working with them to build out new opportunities into the future.
Right, tons, ripe with potential for partnerships and opportunity there. So we'll go to Tabatha for the closing, the strong female voice as always. Any final thoughts?
I have two. One on the success story. I mean, it's very difficult to pick one, but I, as a female voice, at the beginning of the pandemic, there was this group of Indigenous women entrepreneurs who got together on the first Sunday on a call, and I was honored to be part of that group and started to understand how can we support one another. And they are I think they've had more than 100 meetings now since last March. They meet every Sunday and every Wednesday. And the conversation is about how do we support each other? What do you need? how can I support you with my business and your business? And the way that those women have come together in this circle, and that circle has continued to grow, has been incredible. From like laptops flying from Ontario to the Yukon, from like, I need help with my marketing, to someone saying, I'll run a marketing for free marketing instruction. And even just like now this community that's kind of been created on Facebook of like, can someone help me with this? And the way they've amplified one another and amplified one another's business has been such an incredible light throughout this year. But then also with the many tragedies and things that we've been dealing with, that support that they've provided each other as well through this past year. And I think that to me has been such an incredible success story. And I know we're really running out of time, but I want to touch on one really quick thing because we haven't had a chance. And that is this discussion around diversity on boards and in C-suites. And I wish we had more time to talk about that. I think when you're looking at equity partnerships, there is a perfect opportunity there for a partner, for someone to diversify your board, to have an Indigenous person on your board, because they are part of your business plan. And I know there's lots of people out there looking and trying to understand, how do we find more Indigenous people to put on our board? The number of people across this country is huge, of Indigenous leaders that can do that. And I think that's maybe a discussion for another day, but something I wanted to make sure that we didn't pass over.
Well, it definitely sounds like we should have a part 2 to this conversation, and I'll take that back to the board and to Colleen, our executive director, and see what's possible so that we can keep this very important conversation continuing. So, Andrea, I believe you've joined us, and at this point, I'll turn it over to you for the closing. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much. And thank you, guests, for spending your lunch hour with us today. It's been an incredible conversation, and I don't think it's an understatement really to say that making those connections and developing business opportunities that are inclusive of Indigenous communities is probably one of the most important things that Canada needs to do as a country. I can just speak personally. When I started out as a journalist many, many years ago, my first job was in Flin Flon, Manitoba, which is a mining town in northern Manitoba. And at the time, there was two Indigenous reserves in very close proximity that had absolutely nothing to do with the mining community. No one was employed from those reserves, and the communities, neither community was involved in any way in the economic development or benefits that were coming out of that community. And I have to say that several decades on, there's a different mentality and a different perspective. And that's just something that we have to continue to build on as a country. I think is very important. I want to thank Tabatha, Clint, and Matt for joining us today, for your ideas on economic reconciliation, increased partnership, leadership of Indigenous communities in our national economy, and what true inclusion could really look like. Karen, I want to thank you for your skilled moderation and thoughtful guidance of today's conversation. Yes, we hope you will join us for some of our upcoming events. We've still got a great roster to go, even though we're heading into, it's now June and the weather is great, but we do think it's worthwhile to tune in with us on a number of really interesting events that we have coming up in these final weeks of the season. On Monday, June 7th, the club welcomes former President Danny Assaf for the release of his new book, Say Please and Thank You and Stand in Line, One Man's Story of What Makes Canada Special and How to Keep It That Way. It's an inspiring conversation you won't want to miss. And on June 8th, we host a panel on the changing landscape for business and entrepreneurship in 2021. Join us for a discussion featuring Guy Cormier of Desjardins Group and a panel of leaders who have a unique perspective on doing good through business. Thank you again to our sponsors, National Public Relations, Income Meat Sellers, and Imperial for sponsoring today's event. Our events could not be possible without our sponsors, so thank you for your continued generosity.
And to the 2 lucky winners of the Income Eats Limited Estate Winery, and I'm just going to pull up the names here on my text. The first is Maya Skolnick, and the second winner is Sasha D'Souza. So congratulations to you both on winning some great wine. Thank you to our AV supplier, Van Valkenburg Communications and livemeeting.ca for making it possible for us to come together virtually today. Yes, thank you for joining us. Please stay healthy and safe. Have a great day.